Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast Show here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brice Lewis. Obviously, this is a post-show after the Super Bowl. Not right after the Super Bowl like we did on Monday, but a show that's still, the aftermath. Maybe you could call it the aftermath of the Super Bowl, as the Kansas City Chiefs had the parade today, actually, for the Super Bowl. We're going to talk a lot of different things today. We're going to talk about players who have interest from teams already as we shift into free agency and the draft as our main focus going into the NFL offseason. We're also going to talk about some too early predictions for next year, some teams that we think are going to be around next year, teams that may be surprising, and everything like that. And we're also going to talk about just any news and notes around the league. So we're going to start off with teams that are in the best shape right now to get back next year. Obviously, there's a lot of teams right now who are in the playoffs who basically this is really a question of who do we feel like is built right now to be back in this same position next year. Obviously, I think one of the teams that you got to start with is the San Francisco 49ers. Even though they came up short this year, they did have a 20-10 lead on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs with about 6 minutes to go in the fourth. So, all it took was one stop or one turnover, and maybe things would have ended up being different for the 49ers. So, you really can look at this game and that happened Sunday, and you can look at the season the 49ers had in general. And really, the thing about the 49ers team is that they have a very young roster. Their receivers are young. Their defensive line is young. Garoppolo was young. And so, basically, you have positions who are also... You have a lot of positions on your team, I feel like, especially on the defensive end, that you have young players, but they're your strength. They're players that are going to get better because their perception in the league is a young player gets better year after year after year. So if you're making it to the Super Bowl with a young roster, it's better to say that you have the construction moving forward to still be competitive next year because of that. So that's definitely something that they can maybe hang their hat on. Potentially. I feel like that, when you're making these decisions and, trying to decide which teams are going to be back in it next year, I think you have to start with San Francisco because of that reason. They have great construction on their team. Really, everybody except I think Jimmy Ward is going to be on the team next year secondary wise in terms of, because I think Jimmy Ward's the only free agent they have. Linebacker wise, everybody's pretty much going to be the same. Defensive line, everybody's pretty much going to be there. This team's going to be pretty, back to where they were going to be. And obviously on the offensive end of the ball, they have to re-sign Emmanuel Sanders. So that's a pretty big signing for them because Emmanuel Sanders really helped out those young receivers this year. But as long as they stay with the power running game, a good offensive line, good defensive line, and good defense, I don't see why San Francisco wouldn't be back in the picture next year. Another team I think that should be around next year is Baltimore. I think, in their division, you don't know what the Bengals are going to look like. You don't know what Cleveland's going to look like, and you don't know what Pittsburgh's going to look like. So right now, it looks like unless Lamar Jackson falls off, regresses, or they have a ton of injuries, you would feel like with the way this team is also constructed, it's the same thing like the 49ers. Run first, but they're built to win, but they're built to lead. That's the only difference between the 49ers and the Baltimore Ravens is that the 49ers have came back. Baltimore is not a team that is built to come back based off what we've seen this past year. But again, we'll have to see, especially with Lamar Jackson going to improve, hopefully improving going into this year, and etc. So it really just depends. You really just have to kind of see what happens, in my personal opinion. But I think Baltimore has the construction with the receivers and the tight ends and the running back and the offensive line to be right back in the picture next year. They have to make sure they shore that secondary up. They have a couple of free agents in the secondary, but if they could get that shored up, I don't see why Baltimore wouldn't be able to make it back next year. And we just got to look forward to seeing them on the field next year, because these guys are going to come out there obviously a little humiliated after how this season ended in the playoffs against Tennessee Titans. And I think that's something that a team like them, especially again, also they're a young team. They have a young roster. They can use that as motivation to be like, we'll never have this happen again to us if we're ever put in this position again. And that sometimes these types of losses are the right types of motivation needed, especially on a young team. I feel like sometimes with veteran teams, with these types of losses, it hurts, but it's like, you're veterans, you know how to get over it. You move on, you just work hard, and you're just like, we'll see what happens next year. We hope that we'll be more prepared next year. Younger players, you would feel like younger players, they take it to heart. Plus, especially with the fact that young players can improve, it's like, we're going to take it to heart, and then we're also going to get better. Where, like, if you're 32, you've pretty much a lot of the time maxed out on your potential. So it's like, you're probably, if you were productive, you could be productive next year, but are you really improving where players that are young can improve? Another team that I think is going to be around there next year is the Seattle Seahawks. We have to look at Seattle's season. One of the reasons why a lot of people may think that they didn't beat Green Bay was because they weren't healthy at running back, so their running game was inefficient because they're, again, a run-first team. If this playoff showed you anything, the running game is extremely important. The only team that can get away with just passing all over the place right now in the league is Kansas City, because they don't really run the ball at all, and they made them when they won the Super Bowl. Even though they were able to establish some type of running game in the Super Bowl, which did help them, because if obviously they can run the ball, it makes their offense that much more unstoppable. So, if Seattle is able to keep the running game intact, they have all the potential and all the reasonable possibilities in the world for them to be able to play well, compete at a high level, and really just go out there and do what they got to do and try to win. I think that, with Russell around, you'll always have a chance. He is considered one of the best late game quarterbacks, and you have Pete Carroll, who does better with young players. So, and their roster is very young. They have a very young roster. And so, again, Seattle, you only expect them to get better next year. You expect them to improve as a team next year and get to that point where they could be right back in it. Because, like I said, ever since Russell Wilson's getting in the league, I believe every year, but I think 1 year, I think, if I remember correctly, they did not make the playoffs. So usually where the Seattle is always, but even in the year they didn't, they were in the picture. That's usually how it is for the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson. It just feels like it's kind of unlikely you'll ever see Russell Wilson ever have a losing year as long as he's on that team, because of the will and power he has to always make sure they do everything possible to be able to be successful when it comes down to it at the end of the game and at the end of the season. Another team that I think is going to be in the running next year for the Super Bowl, who is constructed to hang around, is the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, they didn't go that far, but you have to think about it. They had a lot of injuries this year. Practice squad at wide receiver. Running backs out. Offensive line out. Defense middle of the pack. A lot of stuff happening. They still got to the playoffs. And it was only a one-possession game against Seattle when they lost. So if Deshaun Jackson comes back, Alshon Jeffrey comes back, Nelson Aguilar comes back, you still got Ertz, you still got Goddard, Miles Sanders emerged, Scott emerged, Jordan Howard, offensive line gets healthy. You feel like Philadelphia has the offense to be much, much more effective next year if they can stay healthy, because you don't ever think that you're going to have that type of injury-riddled season 2 years in a row. If they can shore up some holes in the defense, which really is their secondary, I mean, again, it's just like, why wouldn't Philadelphia, from a construction standpoint, not be able to get back in it too? Because Philadelphia is one of the best constructed teams in the league. They have good coaching. They have a good front office. They sign players that work in their system. And it all works out at the end of the day when they usually put it together. That's why it usually works for everybody. They just got to go out there and play the best way they know how. And with Carson Wentz kind of showing everybody how good he truly and how valuable he truly is to the Philadelphia Eagles and just how valuable he is in general, I just, again, I don't see how you can sit here and think that the Philadelphia Eagles would not be in the picture next year to compete with the way they're structured and the way that they're built. But coming up next, we're going to talk about, is Jimmy G really the right guy for the QB of the 49ers? A lot of people have questions about that. Tom Brady also made a post saying he won't be in a blazer at next year's Super Bowl, and we'll also give you just a little take on the Chiefs Super Bowl parade that happened today. Stay tuned right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about which teams are the best constructed wise to get back to where they were this year, get closer to the Super Bowl, get back to the playoffs. I mentioned about 5 teams I think are best well put together to be still sustaining the success that they have sustained this year, previous years, and for years to come going into the 2020s of this new decade. Now we're going to get into some just individual news talk, some debate, some things like that. Starting with, is Jimmy Garoppolo the right man for the 49ers job? A lot of people they've doubted Jimmy Garoppolo all year. A lot of people have never been sold on Jimmy. They feel like he's not as good as some people think. Some people feel like he's the weak link on offense for them. It's a debate that's been going on, especially with them losing the Super Bowl. The debate's been raging even more because he didn't make any major plays in the game that would have made you sat there and said, oh, wow, Jimmy Garoppolo had this great game. We know he wasn't the reason why they lost this game. He had a very average game, and I think that's why people are wondering, can he be the guy to get you to win a Super Bowl because of that? I think that first we have to be smart about this real quick. If the Kansas City Chiefs had never came back, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Even if Jimmy Garoppolo didn't have a great game or an amazing game, we wouldn't be, because they won a Super Bowl. Like, how are you going to talk smack about a guy who won the Super Bowl? But definitely people are going to remember, well, he had an average game in the Super Bowl, so if Jimmy Garoppolo ever struggled, they're going to bring up, well, he didn't really do that much in the Super Bowl. And I think, it's one of those things that is going to be a question that lingers around him now. Because unless he puts up the flashy numbers and explosive numbers like a lot of these other quarterbacks, people are going to wonder, is he that good? I think sometimes in offenses like the 49ers, when you have a good running game and the team's a run-first team, you sometimes think, oh, well, they're run-first because their quarterback isn't good enough to win them games. But if you think about it, most teams never want to put their quarterback in a position where they always have to throw the ball to win games. You want to be able to have some type of resemblance of a running game. So that way there's an effectiveness in your offense, because it's much more easier to run your offense and play action when the running game is effective. But the thing about passing is that, okay, if we needed to pass, we believe that he can get us there. Jimmy Garoppolo has showed on a couple of occasions when needed, he can make plays in the passing game. But he's also had his moments where he didn't make a play. But every quarterback has it. It's just, I feel like since Jimmy Garoppolo is still fresh and new, and there's a smaller sample size, people are looking to find something quickly to say, yeah, he's justified the money they gave him, or he's not justified the money that he was given by the San Francisco 49ers. So it really just depends on where you stand. I mean, I have people who've talked to me and said, well, he looks like, because they say, look at Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a very handsome man. Man, looks like a quarterback. Man, he looks like, he kind of has that look of a franchise quarterback, if you want to say. And, that, makes people kind of like, okay, he looks like he should be. But then when you look at the play on the field, that's where people have their questions. I believe that Jimmy G, I feel like you have to give him more time before you can make a determination like that. Because remember, his team got to the Super Bowl. So you really can't judge him just because if his team is well constructed defensively and running game, and that's the reason why they were able to get through the playoffs, that's not his fault. You can't fault them for saying, well, we don't even have to have you throw the ball off to win. You can't, remember, they were up 20-10 doing that against the Chiefs. Like you can't fault Jimmy Garoppolo for that. It's almost like they want him just to start throwing all over the place just to show, oh, he can throw the ball. No, we know what our strengths is. There's nothing wrong with their approach. There's nothing wrong with Jimmy G, in my opinion. We'll see what he does, because obviously if the running game isn't as effective, then obviously he's going to be more dependent on to throw and score touchdowns and move the ball. And if he could do that efficiently and effectively, then, we'll get an answer that truly will satisfy a lot of the people who have questions about him. But until that, people are going to sit there and continue to judge him because nobody really saw that one game, I guess, for Jimmy G that was just like, wow, yeah, he's a franchise quarterback, So I think we need to hold up on the pressure we put on him, and we need to be more receptive because, he really could come back next year and light up the league. You never know what type of approach they might have next year. Obviously, the 49ers' strength is running the ball. So if they can, if teams are going to stop the run and Jimmy G has to throw it, then we'll see how good Jimmy G really is. Because here's the thing. Even with a good running game and defense, you're going to need a quarterback eventually to do something. Remember, Cincinnati back in Andy Dalton's first few years had running game, wide receivers, defense, and they could never get out of the wild card. Never. Because the quarterback limited them. Andy Dalton limited them. Jimmy G, first time in the playoffs, got to the Super Bowl. Is he really limiting them if they got to the Super Bowl? I mean, he went against Patrick Mahomes, so unless the offense was constructed for him to throw it all over the place like that, I wasn't expecting him to sit up here throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. They do what they do best, and they believe that is the most successful formula for them to win, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I feel like we shouldn't keep getting on the Jimmy G about this because he's just doing what he can. He's doing what he's told to do, and if he does it well, then what are you really mad about? Like sometimes I feel like fans just want teams to just start chucking it everywhere to see, okay, can he? If we just had to throw the ball around everywhere, could he do it? Could he do it? I feel like it's like you're almost looking to a validation, I guess you could say, looking for validation, so they can feel like, oh yeah, he could be the guy, And I just think it's unfair to him that we're trying to put all the judgment upon him because he was not asked to be Patrick Mahomes. He was asked to make efficient throws, make first down throws, and if there's big plays, take the big play. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Tom Brady was at the Super Bowl this past year in a blazer. And he mentioned that in a post talking about how next year in the Super Bowl, when this time comes around, he won't just be in a blazer anymore. Obviously, from this statement, you can tell Tom Brady is very motivated, especially with everybody doubting him. I think Brady wants to show, even at my age, I could still get a team to the Super Bowl. I think it shows, and I think his preparation he's going to do this offseason, and we'll have to see the decision he ultimately ends up making when he decides of what team he goes to. Because obviously he knows if he wants to keep that promise, he has to go to a team that he feels like can put him back in that position. Obviously, you would think New England would obviously do that. Obviously, we'll have to see how they formulate their offseason plan. It's been reported the Patriots are willing to offer Tom Brady $30 million to give him what he wants, basically. So, we'll have to see what happens with that. And obviously, they need to upgrade their offensive weapons. It makes me feel like when Brady says something like that, he's going to wait to see, okay, what do you do offensively? Because he may not want to sign and then they don't upgrade, because then it's like, oh, I have the same supporting cast as last year, I'm stuck. So I would not be surprised if Tom Brady does the waiting route in the free agency, where he waits to see what teams that are interested in him do, and then he'll evaluate all the teams and think, okay, which team's going to give me the best chance to win? Then he'll make his decision. I don't think this is going to be a day one Tom Brady makes it in one day type of decision. I think this is going to be a very well thought out decision. He's going to really think. He's going to talk to Gillette. He's going to talk to, his agent and think, okay, which team gives me the best opportunity to win? Which team gives me the best opportunity to be successful? And I think that when that comes, we'll see what Tom Brady actually decides to do. So, and lastly, we're gonna give this little tidbit on the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade. It was today. It was a little fun time. Patrick Mahomes got him a title belt. Out here chugging beer like Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, just having a great time. Travis Kelce was having a lot of fun out there. Just a great time for the same fans of Kansas City after how winning the Super Bowl and, being on top of the world. Now people thinking that maybe Kansas City might have go ahead and start a dynasty. So, congratulations to Kansas City Chiefs once again for winning the Super Bowl this year. And we'll be excited to see what happens next year. But coming up next, Jacksonville has 2 London games next year. Is it good or bad? Also, the NFL Combine is later this month. And also, the Chiefs want to keep Sammy Watkins. But are they going to have the money to? All that and more here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we talked about is Jimmy G, the right man to lead the 49ers. Tom Brady also says he won't be in a blazer next year for next year's Super Bowl. He expects to be out there on the field playing. And also, the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade happened. That was a great time all around Kansas City and for the next coming months to come. Now we're going to get into some talk about some expansion about Jacksonville. Jacksonville has agreed to play 2 games in London next year. Obviously, this is very an interesting conversation around this because that obviously means they lose 2 home games, which means that the home fans will only see Jacksonville a total of 6 times next year at home. So that limits 2 games, and some people think that potentially they could lose season ticket holders because of it. Because obviously, I pay season tickets. I want to see all 8 games. I'm not paying for 6. Or they're trying to keep it at an 8-game price, even though they're only going to see them for 6. And the debate really is it good or bad to do something like this? Now, the reason why the league prefers this is it makes twice as more from a London game than it does from a home game. So this means this is obviously money motivated, which a lot of things are. And some people think this is why the league has always entertained maybe trying to get a league out into London. Now, obviously, there's a lot of loopholes. Where would you go? Where's the facilities? Are you able to fund a team out there? What players want to play out there? Because it's weird that every other team's in the United States and we're the only team who has to be in London all the time. So it's kind of one of those things. It's a very controversial question, I think, that will probably linger. A lot of people obviously don't really like this because it's already bad that if you're considered the home team in that game that you have to give up a home game because obviously players would rather be at home preparing for a game than knowing they're going to be in another country for literally almost a week or a few days if they come on the weekend and it's supposed to be a home game, but it feels like a road game. Because imagine if you have 2 road games, then the London game, which is supposed to be a home game, and then another road game. It's like that's almost a month of not being home. You're constantly traveling, could wear out your players more, could tire the players out more. A lot of traveling miles on the body. It's definitely a very fatiguing process, potentially, with them doing something like this. So, it's definitely something I think that will be raised questions. But obviously, again, this makes more money, so obviously that's the reason why there's a motivation. Like, hey, you know, the people in London go out of their way to buy tickets. They go out of their way to buy merchandise. They go out of their way to buy concessions. And we're making double than what we would make at a normal home game, maybe in Jacksonville. So for us in the league, we may feel like this may be more beneficial to us in the long term and for the home team in general from a money perspective. So it's definitely something that, you know, you really just gotta look into. It honestly just depends on what you think about overseas games. Not everybody's a fan of overseas games. It just really depends on who you talk to. But yeah, so we'll have to see if this ends up being a good thing. We have to see if this ends up maybe expanding potentially. There's a lot of things that go into something like this, a very complicated process. So we're going to have to see what happens in that way, in that term, and things like that. So we'll have to figure out what happens. Now, the NFL Combine is later this month, and obviously at the end of the month, people call it the Underwear Olympics. You know, this is a chance to basically, they call this the big job interview, the biggest job interview that you have in this sport, the Combine for new rookies coming into the league. Obviously, a lot of players are invited and decide to come, not come, stuff like that. Obviously, the NFL Combine is obviously important for the fact that, you know, players that maybe want to raise their stock, they could raise. Maybe players have something to prove, can go out here and prove. You know, maybe a lot of analysts and people want to see potentially like what do they have? What's the potential? What do they have to bring to the table? Maybe because, you know, player coaches and scouts maybe want to see, well, what's that 40 time look like? Well, he looks fast on tape, but is he really that fast? What is he like in these types of drills? Like, you know, can he catch while moving? Can he get a sideline? Can the quarterback throw? Can he make that long pass? Can he make an accurate out? Can he make an accurate in? You know, does he have good footwork? Is his hips tight? Is his hips loose? These are all things that are determined at the NFL Combine by a lot of scouts. Obviously, you know, it's obviously broadcasted. You can watch it if you have the NFL Network. It's a time where, you know, people show out. You know, obviously 40-yard dash, obviously people probably consider the biggest thing. Obviously when receivers, running backs, and corners and safeties, you know, run. You know, you never know who might have that 4.2 speed that, you know, somebody's going to want. Cause, you know, literally you could be a small town kid or a small schools kid, mind me. And so you may be projected to be like a 5th round pick. And then he runs 4.2 and now he moves up to the 3rd round. Even though everything else was what he expected, well, he's fast. And so we can do something with that speed. Like if you're a wide receiver, you could do something with that speed. And so you maybe feel like there's much more potentially here with the fact that that's the case and that there's a lot there to be taken out of it. So I think that it's definitely something that obviously, you know, if you truly love football, you watch the Combine. You know, you learn about guys that you never knew of. You learn more about guys that you've watched in college football. Like I said, a lot of every kid has their own story. Every kid has their own, you know, mission at these events. It'll be interesting to see how it actually turns out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, some people who don't participate here is because they participate at their pro day. They feel like, well, Combine, I honestly, some people feel like the Combine is more for guys who want to solidify their draft stock or raise their draft stock. Like that's why sometimes a lot of guys who are going to be projected top 10 picks don't really perform in this, because they feel like, well, I'm going to be a top 10 tick. This really won't do anything but just basically make people feel like, okay, yeah, well, he's going to be this. So why do I need to do anything? I could just wait till my pro day and show out there with my coaches that I went with in college and the players that I've played around in college and go from there. So definitely something that is intriguing. And then lastly, Kansas City wants to keep Sammy Watkins. Now, Kansas City, I believe, only has $20 million in cap space, but Sammy Watkins' option is $16 million. So obviously, if you keep him, you're about to lose almost all the cap you have. Now you'll be tight against the cap if you keep Sammy. So their goal is to basically kind of figure out how can we keep him without being cap strapped. So they might maybe try to make a deal where they maybe convert some of his salary into a signing bonus. That's obviously a popular method. Julio Jones did that with the Atlanta Falcons when he first signed his monster deal. He converted before they signed the deal, I think the year previously, they converted all the money he had up front into a signing bonus so that way they could save money. Obviously, it's something that I could see Kansas City doing. I can understand why they want to keep Sammy Watkins because they feel like he's basically almost, some people may consider a number one receiver who's not a number one on the team. So even if he gets on your third, fourth cornerback, Sammy Watkins can really kill you in the secondary, and he can really make plays. So it's definitely something that Kansas City has very strongly interest in doing. They want to be able to keep Sammy because they know how valuable he is to the receiving core. And, they're hoping that if they keep his receiving core intact, they're going to probably still have one of the best offenses in the NFL next year. And also remember, Sammy Watkins made a big play in the Super Bowl, which helped them come back. And, obviously you see the value of having a guy like him around, but you'll have to also see, because there may be some teams and players who are like, listen, Sammy, we want you to come here and be our number one, and we'll pay you number one receiving money. So it's definitely important for Kansas City, if Sammy does opt out potentially, to get him signed, get him back, and get him back in a Chiefs uniform and continuing this run that they've gone on offensively for the past few years since he's been there. But coming up next, we have more news and notes around the league. Seahawks are interested in Greg Olsen. Chargers keep their OC in place from last year after letting go of Ken Risenhunt. Cowboys are likely to tag Des Prescott. What does this mean? And Des Bryant potentially back with the Cowboys. Stay tuned for that and more.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we talked about the Jacksonville Jaguars having 2 games in London next year. Is that good or bad? We also talked about the NFL Combine coming up later this month. Obviously, that's one of the biggest job interviews for any college kid entering the league to impress scouts and make an impression and solidify your draft status or improve draft status, but also potentially can hurt draft status if not potentially prepared or has a bad showing. Also, the Kansas City Chiefs want to keep Sammy Watkins, as obviously that's one of their plans, is to keep this great receiving core that's helped Patrick Mahomes be so great for years together. And obviously Sammy Watkins is someone that they want to tie up for years to come. Now we're going to get into some news and notes around the league. The Seahawks are interested in Greg Olsen, the tight end. He's a free agent this year from the Carolina Panthers. He's been Cam Newton's most reliable tight end for basically his entire career so far. Now, Greg Olsen has some options. Now, he has a job waiting for him at Fox if he wanted to retire. Obviously, at this point in his career, that's something he'll think about. But he also has teams that are still interested in him as a tight end. He can still play, and he is still very efficient at the tight end position. So it's definitely something that Greg Olsen has to sit down and consider. Does he want to move on? Does he want to stay? What is really his goal here? I think he'd be a great fit with Russell Wilson. It's funny because the Seattle Seahawks, I think, depending on their tight end situation, would have up to 3 tight ends they can rely on. With Jacob Hollister emerging this year, they had earlier tight end in the season, another tight end that went down with season-ending injury. Obviously, Will Dissly, he was looking like he was going to be a top tight end. And if you bring in Greg Olsen, a veteran guy, I think that way he won't have to carry the load as the main tight end, but at the same time, he's still effective and can get you crucial first downs and make plays. So I think if Seattle was able to potentially pick up Greg Olsen, I think that'd be a great addition for the team. He is still a willing blocker at this point in his career, and like I said, he can make plays when called upon. It's one of the reasons why he still holds a lot of value in a lot of people's eyes in the league when it comes to potentially picking up a guy like Greg Olsen and bringing him in to the team to potentially, be the guy moving forward, being the guy that you expect moving forward and potentially, just doing what they got to do out there to be the best they can be. Also, the Chargers are keeping Shane Steichen, excuse me if I say his name wrong, as the OC after impressing in place of Ken Whitsitt, who they let go earlier in the year this year when the offense was kind of struggling. The Chargers finished 6th in passing at the end of the year. I think that, obviously this is very interesting, I think, moving forward for the Chargers. Obviously looking like they're going to go into it this season with a new quarterback. Phil Rivers is not expected to return, as the Chargers are expected to move off of Phil, but potentially could have maybe a Teddy in there, maybe Tom Brady if they can get lucky. And so, if they can pick up Brady, that'd be great. There's a lot of quarterbacks that can go into that slot. San Diego has a very talented roster. They have a very talented team. It's more a matter of just finding the right quarterback to fit that team so they can be the most successful and compete for a championship. Because people really think with the roster that the San Diego Chargers have formulated, they could compete. It's just obviously with keeping an offense coordinator in place that they've had to end the season that they like, there's going to be continuity on the offensive end in terms of everybody else. Like I said, it's just the quarterback who has to come in, learn a new system, and figure out how everybody plays, what everybody's strength is, and everything like that. Obviously, those are the challenges of sometimes implementing a new player like that into a system. San Diego also has a big decision to make on Melvin Gordon this offseason. Are they going to pay him maybe the money he wants that he held out for and missed a couple of games for? I mean, he really didn't have the greatest season, coming back, but he may still think, hey, I still think I should get this type of money. So we'll have to see. They have Austin Eckler, who emerged as a very good running back this year for them, so they may feel like Melvin Gordon is a little bit more expendable potentially. Obviously, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, 2 very good receivers. They also have a big free agent decision to make on Hunter Henry. So obviously, if you're going to bring in a guy like Brady, it's going to be very important to keep those guys around. So it'll be more enticing for any quarterback in general to come to the San Diego Chargers because they know that they have weapons surrounding them where they can be most successful and compete at the highest level and potentially compete for maybe championship aspirations in San Diego. And I've said San Diego this whole time, haven't I? Oh boy, it's all good. The LA Chargers, it's still on the mind. You just want to call them San Diego. It's the LA Chargers. My bad. The LA Chargers have championship aspirations, and if they can find the right quarterback, then they'll have all the potential in the world to be successful. Another quarterback news. The Dallas Cowboys, it looks like they're going to franchise Dak Prescott. Obviously, we know Dak Prescott really isn't a fan of that, and Dak Prescott doesn't really want that. So that's going to be kind of the issue here, is not alienating Dak Prescott by giving him the franchise tag. He's also talked about not showing up to camp in the OTAs with the new head coach and a new program without having a new contract deal done. So obviously he's made it clear, like, hey, we've been talking about this for a while. Y'all say y'all want to sign me, but you're not giving me the money I want. So now I might not start showing up things you want me to show up to, which now could hurt, the team moving forward. And, obviously this is something Cowboys don't want lingering. I mean, in these types of situations, you never want these situations lingering, especially your quarterback, because he's the most important player of your offense. He gets the ship running. And so if they're going to franchise Dak Prescott, it'll be very interesting to see what he decides to do. It'll be very interesting to see how he decides to handle this situation. Because obviously, like I said, he's not going to be very happy about that. He's not going to be happy that he's not going to get the money that he wants. And hopefully it won't be anything too bad, but it's definitely something that you need to keep an eye out for. Obviously, I'm sure with the new head coach, Mike McCarthy, he would want to have Dak there for OTAs and offseason programming because, obviously it helps him get to know Dak better, helps him get to know his personnel better, know what he's working with. And, obviously that's why it's very important with Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, and the guys making the check decisions. Don't push this situation into another Zeke situation potentially. Dak, even though he won a new contract last year, he worked in the offseason. He did everything you wanted him to do. He was a good soldier, hoping that, I'm going to do what you want me to do. I'm not going to hold out, but I do want more money. Now, next offseason, it still seems like you're not going to give him what he wants, so he may feel like, okay, well, now I'm not going to be the good soldier. Now I'm not going to give you what you want, and I'm going to hold out if I have to. We don't know if he's going to hold out into training camp or anything. Obviously, it's too early to tell, but initially, if he doesn't get that new contract, he's saying he will not report to OTAs in the offseason program when it starts May and March. So, we're going to have to see what happens. And lastly, Dez Bryant has been preparing for a comeback ever since tearing his Achilles with the Saints. He has been preparing for a comeback, and one team he would like to go back to is the Dallas Cowboys. He would like to return to them. He would like to maybe finish career there as a Dallas Cowboy. I think that, if Dallas thinks they can use him, then why not? I mean, they would just have to figure out what would his role be within the offense. Obviously, he wouldn't be the number one or even the number two. So is Dez willing to take maybe a reduced role potentially in this offense? So, we have to see. Obviously, I think Dez knows he's not a number one receiver at this point in his career, but, he is still a big target who can catch, and maybe he can, be a good goal line receiver, kind of like an Anquan Bolden at the end of his career, or how he finished his career with Baltimore and San Francisco. He can kind of be that guy, who gets you first downs, gets you tough yards, gets you touchdowns, and just does all the dirty work, because Dez Bryant is definitely physically skilled enough to do that job. But coming up next, we're going to talk about National Signing Day in college football. We're going to talk about who had the best classes coming out of this day, as a lot of teams in college have gotten themselves ready for the future, and a lot of coaches are happy with some of the players that have committed to their programs on this day. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about news and notes around the league, like the Seattle Seahawks being interested in Greg Olsen bringing him into the team, bringing in veteran leadership. Also, the Cowboys look like they're going to franchise Dak Prescott. Dak obviously isn't happy about that. It won't show up to OTAs because of that, especially if it actually ends up coming to fruition. Des Bryant also thinking about making a comeback to the league, eyeing the Cowboys as one of his potential places to play, and also the Chargers keeping their offensive coordinator that they went with after letting go of Ken Whisenhunt this past season, early in the season, to remain as the offensive coordinator going into next season. Now we're going to switch to some college football talk, which I haven't talked about here in a couple of weeks here, but we're going to switch to some college football talk. It was National Signing Day, and obviously, we got to talk about the rankings of some of the top classes in college football. Obviously, this is a big day because obviously you're getting some of the best recruits in the nation coming into college, committed. So we're going to have to see what happens. So, the number one recruiting class in this year's National Signing Day race was the Georgia Bulldogs. The Bulldogs got number one. They have 25 players who committed, 4 5-stars, 15 4-stars, and 6 3-stars. Obviously, some of their big pledges from the day was tight end Denero Washington and cornerback Keely Ringo. Obviously they also got 5-star tackle Broderick Jones and a couple other guys. I mean, Kirby, since he's been there, has always recruited some of the best recruiting classes in Georgia. Mark Richt always used to get top 10 recruiting classes, but he would never get a lot of number 1, number 2. It'd be like a lot of top 5, top 10. So he was getting great recruits, but never the top class. When Kirby got there, he's now getting some of the best, talent to come to Georgia. That's why Georgia has been so close ever since after his first year. They've been so close. Obviously, the second year, almost winning the national championship, and then the last 2 years being an SEC championship win away from making the playoff. So they've always had the talent year after year to be competitive, and it just shows again with another great class from Kirby and those guys. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, losing Jake Fromm, the competition between the new Wake Forest transfer and Dwayne Mathis and Van Beck to see who the quarterback's going to be is going to be very important for their success going into next season. And also replacing, DeAndre Swift and other guys. Pickens development is going to be important. So we're going to have to see what happens. Number 2 is the Clemson Tigers. Clemson has ever since Deshaun Watson was there, it became a powerhouse program like Alabama, where they're getting top recruiting classes, top 5, top 3 every year now. In certain people's reporting, some people think Clemson had the number 1 recruiting class. They had 23 commits, 5 5-stars, 12 4-stars, and 6 3-stars. Dabo Swinney, it's funny, he comes in every year saying everybody doubts him. Everybody doesn't think they're that good, but it's hard to kind of keep saying that when you keep getting some of the best recruiting classes year after year and being in the national championship game year after year after year. So it was, it's another great recruiting class for them. They came out there, they did what they had to do. They got some key commutes today. They got the 5-star defensive end Corey Foreman, as well as DJ. I don't know how to say his name, and I won't. But he was also a quarterback, one of the best quarterback dual threats coming out this year. And, it's going to be very important to see what happens, obviously, with them moving into this next coming season because, obviously coming off that stinging national championship loss, Clemson's going to be right back in the picture again, especially in a weak ACC. Unless the team in the ACC makes a jump, you don't really see any reason why Clemson wouldn't be able to make it back to the national championship next year, or at least the playoff in that matter. Number 3 was the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama, they have the 3rd best recruiting class, but they did strike out on a couple of big targets. They could have had a better recruiting class. But, they got some good guys. They got 4-star receiver Javon Baker, 4-star defensive tackle Jamal Burrows. And you got Nick Saban that's still at the helm. Alabama's going to be back next year. Obviously, it looks like they're going to get, Matt Jones or maybe Tua's brother or Bryce Young, the new 5-star freshman quarterback, the number 1 dual threat quarterback in the nation who's coming in this year to potentially start at quarterback. They're still going to have some of the best receivers. Obviously, Najee Harris came back this year, so they're going to have a very great running game this year. Alabama's never going to be a team that you can just look at and say they're going to have a down year, especially with the number 3 recruiting class. We're used to seeing Alabama be 1, but number 3 still isn't a bad class, and it's still a very coveted class when you compare it to a lot of other classes in college football. Number 4, Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State, there was some drama surrounding them a little bit. They had to replace their defensive coordinator. So obviously, a couple of defensive guys were kind of wavering with their pledges to Ohio State, obviously, because this is the guy they thought they were going to be coached under. With a new coach coming in there, that may make them a little bit more suspicious. But, they still were able to get 3 5-stars, 14 4-stars, and 8 3-stars with a class size of 25. They look pretty good to me. Ohio State under Ryan Day, they look like a great team. They looked like one of the most complete teams in the nation last year. They still get Justin Fields back. They still have a lot of their young talent coming back. I think Ohio State's going to be right back in it again next year. Again, Ohio State's kind of in a conference that's tougher than the ACC, but at the same time, you still feel like they're head and shoulders better than everybody else. So unless they trip up this year, I don't see any reason why Ohio State wouldn't be able to make it back to the playoff. They have all the talent in the world in this recruiting class. Obviously getting a 5-star tackle like Paris Johnson Jr. and a starting best receiver in the nation coming out this year in 2020, Julian Fleming. You just don't see why Ohio State would fall off and why Ohio State wouldn't be able to make it back to where they were this year and potentially getting back to that playoff, avenging last year's loss and making things happen so they could potentially, make things, work in their favor and, be able to, basically win, because that's the goal of the end of the day. You want to win. You want to be successful, and you can't hate somebody from that. So, obviously we'll have to see what happens when it comes to the season for Ohio State, but I think they're good to go going into the coming season. Number 5, the LSU Tigers. Obviously LSU needed a big recruiting class after losing a lot of talent on the offensive line, like Joe Burrow, the running back, 4 of their offensive linemen, Jefferson, they're losing a lot of guys. So obviously this recruiting class was big. Landing a top 5 recruiting class would be big. From this class, it was a class size of 24, 3 5-stars, 14 4-stars, 7 3-stars. They were able to pick up Cavontre Bratt for a 4-star running back. Obviously, they needed him to fill up the running back hole that was left by Clyde Edwards. They were able to do other things. They were able to get a 5-star tight end who's going to really help whoever the new quarterback at LSU is. Is going to help out in that production, and hopefully he can make a contribution early so they can be successful going into the future, and basically do a lot of things. I also like to talk about Texas A&M. Texas A&M had the 6th best recruiting class. They had 26, 2 5-stars, 13 4-stars, and 11 3-stars. Texas A&M was a team that you feel like in a couple years could become a team that could compete with some of the top teams because Jimbo Fisher is one of the best recruiters in the nation, and that's how he was able to make Florida State one of the best teams in the country. And you've seen what's happened to them since he's left. So with all the talent that they have, I think this will be very interesting to see what Texas A&M looks like this year. You would think they would be a better team this year also with all the new talent that they've added. So, Texas A&M is definitely a team that you got to watch out for, they're the team that people are kind of, they're kind of just waiting for that elevation. You can say an elevation in terms of wins and in terms of competing with some of the top teams in the country and winning big games. That's going to help them. I mean, they're already top 5 without winning any big games. So if they can get some big game wins, they could really be a top 3 recruiting class at the end of the day with Jimbo Fisher. And to finish out the top 10, Auburn was number 7. Number 8 was the Florida Gators. Number 9 was the Tennessee Volunteers. And number 10 was the Texas Longhorns. Obviously, for the number 10, you saw 3 SEC teams. So that's about 5, I believe. 5 in the top 10. Obviously, you see the SEC still dominating in all recruiting around the world, or around the country. So, obviously SEC is still going to be on top of their game next year. But coming up next, I'm going to discuss with you back to the NFL who I think are going to be some of the best teams next year, plus also some surprise teams that could potentially surprise you. Stay tuned for all that and more.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we talked about National Signing Day, some of the best college signing days, team's best college signing day. We did the top 10. I broke down the top 6 and then told you about the rest of the top 10. Obviously Georgia had the number 1 recruiting class. Again, if you go to different websites, different people, they may have switch swap Clemson for number 1, Georgia's number 2, but when I went for Georgia was number 1. And they had an excellent recruiting class, and Clemson, Alabama, all of them still obviously had excellent recruiting classes, and teams are filling out their rosters for the future, and you're building depth on their squads and everything like that. But now we're going to get back to the NFL. We're going to talk about some teams that, now, earlier in the show, I talked about the best constructed teams to be successful. Now I'm going to tell you the teams I think are going to be good next year. Obviously, I'm not going to really go back into the teams I've already discussed, because all those teams I do think are going to be good this year that I discussed. The only team that I think could potentially take a step back next year is potentially, you never know what could happen with the Eagles. You never know if Dallas might be better, so you never know if something might change. But I really don't want to go back into the same teams I talk about again and talk about them here, so I'll give you some other teams I think are going to be good. I think the Rams are going to be good next year. I think the Rams, they have talent. They just have to figure out some things. Obviously, Todd Gurley isn't what he used to be, so I think it's going to be very important that the Rams solidify themselves with a running back committee that's very effective, like the San Francisco 49ers did, obviously, because they had 3 running backs, and whoever has the hot hand is the guy. You need 3 reliable guys, because remember, they paid Todd Gurley to be their back and be the main guy, and then you have a guy who just comes in for him here and there. Now, with Todd Gurley not being Todd Gurley of old, you kind of need a running back who's more than capable of carrying maybe half of, sometimes more of the load. And so I think if they can figure that out, the Rams, I definitely think are going to be a better team. I mean, even with all the stuff that went through, they went 9-7. So it's not like they were bad by any stretch of the imagination this year. They just had some injuries. They got a little older. Obviously, they have one of the oldest rosters, so maybe they might try to get a little younger. But I think that Sean McVay is going to get these guys back up and running. It's kind of risky talking about an NFC West team being better next year because the division looks so tough. You don't know how good the Cardinals are going to be next year with Kyler Murray's second year. You don't know where the 49ers are going to be. You don't know where the Seahawks are going to be. It's just like, somebody's going to have a bad year. And you just don't know who. But I do think Sean McVay will get this ship right back and rolling again. And I think they'll be back in good shape when it's all said and done. Another team I think that's going to be good next year, I think the Saints are still going to be good dependent upon what happens with Drew Brees. Now, obviously, we saw what happened without Drew Brees and they were still good without him. But again, Teddy Bridgewater, I think, and Drew Brees are kind of similar in terms of quarterback play. Drew Brees is just a better version of him, but they're very similar in the way they play. Obviously, Teddy's probably going to be gone, but it'll be interesting because if Drew retires, would they go and offer Teddy a big deal? But then you also remember I reported last week that they thought Taysom Hill was going to be the future quarterback. So what would they really do at the quarterback position? If they can find a capable guy, then the Saints have all the capability in the world to be good, but also they've suffered a lot of heartbreaking losses. So, you don't know how it's going to affect them. But I do think if Drew Brees does come back for this year, I think they'll be right back in it. It's still good. You still got Alvin Kamara. You got Michael Thomas, one of the best receivers in the game. You still have a young, improving defense, a good defense too, with one of the best rushers in Cam Jordan. You have all the potential in the world, I feel like, with the Saints to be just as good. It's just really, it's not the regular season success, it's playoff success. What can they do when they get to the playoffs? Because they've had struggles when they've gotten there, obviously, as you saw with Minnesota and previous years, heartbreaking losses. So just getting over that hump that the Saints are going on right now, because you don't know how long this window will be open. You don't know if maybe an NFC South team will improve, like maybe the Falcons might bounce back, maybe Tampa Bay might bounce back. You really don't know if any of these people might bounce back and be better next year. So you definitely don't want to sit here and, get a little lazy, I guess you could say. You want to make sure you're still in your game, and I think the Saints and Sean Payton always stay focused at all times, and they're always on their game because they know how hard it is to remain, good in this league on a consistent basis. And I also think that I think Buffalo has a sustainable way of play next year. I think they're still going to be good next year as well. The reason why I say Buffalo is because they still have a defense. Josh Allen is going to get better. And I think they're going to address their need, which I think is wide receiver. John Brown is a good receiver, but he can't be your number one receiver. Their offense was limited because of their weapons. If they can get some weapons, like if they were able to maybe steal Sammy Watkins away from Kansas City back to Buffalo where he started his career, with Josh Allen, with that arm, Buffalo could really take the top off some teams and definitely be a top team. They have the potential. They just got to get the right guys and the right system around them. I think Sean McDermott is one of the best coaches in the league, one of the best adjusting coaches in the league. Also, he's great at making adjustments. It's one of those things that you really think that things are going to look well going into next season for these guys, and you think things are going to hopefully trend upwards. And maybe, depending on what happens in New England, can dethrone the New England Patriots next year. Which still leads me into a team that I think might not be there next year. I think that the Patriots, if Tom Brady does not return, I am predicting the Patriots will not be a playoff team next year. I'm not saying, and so yes, that also means that I would predict they're not winning the division. But if they don't get Brady back, and let's say whoever they come bring in is not solidified with that offense, how are they going to be able to score points? Is the defense going to basically have to be one of those years where the defense literally has to do everything to make them stay relevant, to make them stay competitive in all their games? Because that obviously puts a lot of pressure on the defense. I don't want to doubt Bill Belichick. You never want to doubt Bill Belichick, but that's going to be one of the biggest tests of his career. This isn't the 08, 09 Patriots where Brady was hurt, but you had Wes Welker and Randy Moss and running game and defense, and so that way Matt Castle just came in there and had to just bull game manage. It's different. It's different now. Your offense needs some work. Brady's commanding. I mean, you would think if Brady doesn't come back, they would invest money into the offense, but at the same time, who's throwing them the ball? They're still going to be running that offense that is kind of rigid on young players, so it's not the easiest offense to learn. It's not the easiest offense to, do at a high level. So if they can't get that right on the offensive end, I feel like New England might not make it next year. Obviously, we'll see what happens going into free agency and et cetera. We'll have to see how it turns out and what happens. But right now, I am kind of making that bold prediction, I guess you could say, that maybe New England's not going to make the playoffs next year. Now, a team that I do think that did make playoffs this year that will make it next year, I think San Diego. I think San Diego, if they could get a quarterback who can make plays and don't turn the ball over, they should make the playoffs. Like Phillip Rivers, he scored. It's just he turned the ball over so much. If he didn't turn over the ball so much, they probably could have won 2-3 more games that would have gotten them into the playoffs. I feel like you need a guy who's an efficient quarterback like a Bridgewater or Brady. If you could get a guy like that and take advantage of the weapons they have, I don't see why San Diego couldn't make it to the playoffs. I don't see why San Diego wouldn't be successful. They would have all the potential in the world to be successful because they have all the talent in the world to be successful. I think they're a team that you can't sleep on. They're a team that you have to watch out for. They play in a division that's winnable. I mean, Kansas City's number is going to be the guy. It's going to be the team, but, you don't know what's going to happen in Denver. We think Drew Lock's going to be better. Listen, they're another team that could be a surprise team next year. AFC West is definitely going to be a very interesting division because it's not looking too good in Oakland, in my opinion, but I do feel like with Denver, running game defense, if Drew Lock plays like he played at the end of the year, you potentially got your quarterback, potentially the playoff team. Same thing with San Diego. You have defense, running game, wide receivers, get you quarterback, play well, playoffs. I mean, AFC West could be a very tough division next year. So nobody should think the Kansas City is going to walk through that division and think this is going to be a cakewalk for them. Because this division looks like it's getting tougher. So it's going to be definitely interesting to see. I know there's a lot of hope in both of those cities to see what happens with their teams next year. But that's all we got for you today on the GSMC Football Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.